So today I'm here with Rachel Gallardo, who is a journalist at Intermat.
Hi, so happy to be here today.
So, how did you get into wrestling?
So, my mom actually was a manager when she was in high school, and that's the high school I went to. And then that actually carried over into college. And so I grew up, my sister grew up going to wrestling matches at Appalachian State, and we just grew up in wrestling culture. And that's how I really got into it and stuck with it.
And how did you get into journalism?
So, it's kind of funny. To me, it's kind of funny because it's if the people that really know me, it's just like it's a very me thing. I got a message from Earl, who runs Intermat, and when Willie had just purchased the site, and Earl was putting together a team of people for the conference correspondence, and he reaches out to me and he goes, "Hey, I think you'd be a good fit. Or if you know anyone, if you aren't able or aren't interested, love to have your input." And so I was like, "Hey, I'll take a crack at it. Cool." So here I am, and I actually have a background in nutrition. I'm a clinical nutrition manager at a small hospital and nursing home and back home in North Carolina. So it's cool that I get to do not science-based writing. I get to do, I call, sports writing the fun writing. And when I'm charting and working my job, that's very factual, very science-based. You have to use a very specific type of language with that. So yeah, that's how I got into that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that you just happen to be able to cover wrestling because I know as a journalist, it's not very likely that you get to cover the sport that you want to cover. So that's really cool. That you got to cover
Right.
wrestling. So do you feel like it's harder for you? Because I cover women's wrestling, you cover men's wrestling. So do you feel like it's harder for you being a female covering men's wrestling?
Yes and no. Yes, because sometimes I feel that women that report on men's wrestling, it may be easier for us to have, I guess, kind of a target on our backs. Or what I mean by that is we are open to being criticized more, to being scrutinized more, because we're different. We look different. We operate different. We are not the one of them. It's some of us either have or haven't wrestled, and I haven't wrestled before, but I just know a lot about wrestling, but I'm not good at it. If anyone's seen that video of me getting thrown, I think it was back in October, the end of September, early October, and I broke a nail. I'm just not good at wrestling, but I really enjoy the technicalities of the sport. Anyway, point being, I think it can be difficult because there's everybody talks about, especially with men's wrestling, oh, it's such a brotherhood, and a lot of masculine terms when it comes to describing wrestling. But with the emergence of sanctioning women's wrestling and sanctioning and at the high school level, at the college level, at other levels, and looking at more women in these journalism roles or as sports information directors, as directors of operations, athletic trainers, it's really nice to see that, there's a sisterhood in the sport as well. There's people like us who are Twitter friends. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really nice to have that sisterhood that I always considered wrestling as, oh yeah, these are all my big brothers, or they're all my big group of brothers. But really I also have a big group of sisters too. So it is, but it isn't. So it's also, I think, a way that I try to keep it like my own, or I try to hold my own identity, I guess, is the way I dress and the style I use. I try to keep my hair done, my makeup done, my nails, wear fun outfits, because not everybody does that. And I think that's just something cool that we can bring to the table. It's, we're going to get stared at anyways because we're women and because we're kind of in a foreign place compared to most men, especially at the national tournament. I feel like I'm spiraling off from your original question, but
You're good.
anyway, at the national tournament, so Division One nationals, you see a lot of men. You see a lot of guys in like khaki pants, jeans, black pants, whatever, polo shirts, t-shirts walking around, a lot of guys being dudes, baseball caps, whatever. And then you got me running around in a mini skirt and platform tennis shoes and like, hair and makeup done, glitter everywhere. But I've kind of noticed more some other ladies I know in the sport, they are dressing up more or kind of like owning their style and not as like oh, I just need to blend in. It's like, well, we're gonna stick out anyways. So I'm really gonna stick out.
Have fun with it. You might as well have
Right.
fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is,
What was it?
it's difficult, but it's not.
Yeah, that's kind of like how I feel. I feel like it'd be easier for me though because I cover women's wrestling. So like people are already more open to having women in the sport.
Mm-hmm.
But so what was it like covering the national tournament? Like that's such a big tournament.
It was awesome. So the fun part about that is I actually have gotten to go as a manager in the past with Appalachian State. So they always had like, or I think it was like maybe I'd gone like 3 times as a manager with Appalachian, 2 or 3 times, because I don't remember what the pandemic year really, the COVID year really messed everything up, but it messed a lot of things up. But anyway, I got to go, I think, about 3 times. And it's now evolved into a mommy-daughter trip. So now I always like have to drag my mom with me because like I'm not gonna go by myself. Anyway, but covering the national tournament from the media standpoint, very different. There's a press conference on the Wednesday afternoon, on the Thursday before the tournament. And you have a certain schedule, you have certain places you can and can't go. If you aren't assigned a seat in certain areas, then you have these other places you can go sit. So it's very like, hey, you have to go here, you can do this, and you've got your rules you need to follow. It's just like when you're a fan and you're watching the sport, if you don't follow by the rules, they could ask you to leave. So you got to conduct yourself in a nice way, as you should with any job. But anyway, so the first time doing that though, we didn't have with Intermat our whole conference correspondent team. So it was myself, Austin Summer, he usually covers EIWA, Earl, who runs the site, and Willie, who he owns Intermat and also runs Mat Scouts. So we kind of like divided up of, all right, like you grab some of these guys, you grab some of those guys for the first couple of rounds. And then as the tournament progressed, it was almost like all right, get locked and loaded, whatever interviews you can grab or what kind of pictures you can grab or what kind of content you could grab, just grab it. So it's really nice to get to work with a team of people that's very collaborative, that if you have an idea that they're willing to work with it. For example, the idea that really hit me last year was doing a National Women's Month video about the women in wrestling. So whether that's Mariah Marinelli, Director of Operations for Iowa, whether that's wrestling moms like Allison Schwab from University of Northern Iowa, or other managers I've interviewed, just other women in the sport who I think are wonderful and deserve their props too. Even though we were at the men's Division I tournament, it was still cool to get to showcase, there are women who are behind the scenes making things happen. And so there was that. Sorry again, my ADHD brain has been today. It's been a fun day. Anywho, so covering the tournament was a lot of fun. And then I think my favorite part though was the championship interviews. So there's really no manual of what to do when you go to something like that. So I just kind of like would watch people, see where they would go, or some people that I knew like, hey, where's this? Where's that? And not being scared to ask questions. I think it's great to, always ask questions, always be inquisitive, always maybe have the mindset of no question's a dumb question. Now there are some questions that have the potential to be dumb questions, but you can just laugh it off, just ha ha, laugh it off, and then you can go feel bad about it later at the hotel. It's, you just laugh it off. So, anywho, life is a lot more fun when you learn to laugh instead of stress out about everything. But anywho, going back and getting to just kind of set up shop at the championship interview room, that was awesome. Getting to kind of just listen to people's interview questions, listening to how other people interview, and just learn. I'm what's it called? I think it's a tactile or kinetic based learner. So I learn by doing, and by watching others. So getting to watch others perform their craft, like their full-time jobs, that was really awesome to get to learn how to be better at what I do. So it was really great. It was really awesome. I did miss Gable's backflip, and I did miss his him taking his shoes off. But hey, I got some really cool interviews and got some really cool content, and it was worth it to get to produce some good pieces of content for our audience. And it's like, I can go back and watch that, whatever. But also my dad got to go for the first time and watch. So he just went crazy, and he's like, oh my gosh, this guy did a backflip and he's going to go into WWE, and was with my mom. They sat together, and they like that. I'm glad they got to, have that moment, spend that time together. And so yeah, I'm okay with, sometimes like, oh man, I missed that moment, but also knowing that I'm able to be there to help capture these behind the scenes moments for the rest of our audience or the rest of our subscribers to consume. That really means a lot, because it's just another way we humanize our athletes, because they're more than the robots that we think they are. Or it's like, even with the Super Bowl, you see these larger than life athletes, and it's like, oh wow, they're invincible, and whoa. But then if you were to see them on the street, they're just like you and me. They're everyday people. So anyway, adding some more humanity to our athletes as well, because at the end of the day, we're all humans.
Yeah. And I feel like that's what you were saying about like learning by watching. If there's, I agree with that. Like, if there's anything I've learned, it's to just kind of like sometimes watch and observe how others do it, like within wrestling journalism, and ask questions. And then that's how you learn. So but how did you prepare for the NCAA tournament? Like, how do you prepare for a tournament, once again, like of that nature, where there's so many athletes? And
so again, having a good game plan, communicating with your bosses really well, and being like, all right, who can and can't go, or getting your media badges approved. That's like step one. But so leading up to the tournament, maybe looking at different storylines that have developed, looking at the qualifiers from each conference, looking at, what are some potential matchups that could take place, going through, any kind of a simulation in the brackets. Like, all right, like you have your fantasy brackets, whatever, kind of seeing what could happen. What are some crazy upsets that could happen? What's this? What's that? What's the third? To me, I played the what if brain, or like the what if game. So just trying to figure out what are some big things that like have the potential to be, what's the potential to be a big story? What's the potential to be a big interview? If say somebody gets their 100th college win, or again, things that should be celebrated. Say you get a big win, say for example, a school that has never had a Division I national qualifier. They have their first qualifier. So just even highlighting those athletes, learning about, I really tried to hone in on Southern Conference. I don't want to say my conference, but like the conference I cover, Southern Conference, and really becoming more of an expert on these athletes, learning more about, who they may match up against, maybe what they have done in the past, how they performed in past national tournaments, what seed they got for this national tournament, and what that's going to look like for them in the bracket and moving forward. Any kind of like, I guess, revenge matchups, or, anybody else who they've wrestled earlier in the season that they could face off against. Again, what's the potential? What are some storylines that we could see come out of this? But also staying observant, concentrating on, or like always watching the brackets, watching the bout boards, watching who's on the mats, and learning the layout of the arena, learning where your media availability areas are. Because there's also places where you are and aren't supposed to film. And again, you don't want to get booted out of there. So yeah, preparing for that, I also didn't have a full-time job. So I had gotten my job offer in Detroit on that Wednesday when I was going to pick up my media badge. I got the call from my job offer saying, hey, we're going to offer you blah, blah, blah. We're sending you the packet. We just want to let you know we're sending it your way. So that was really cool that I had that moment outside the Little Caesars Arena in Detroit too. But it was much easier to prepare last year, I think, because I mean, not that I was sitting at home doing nothing all day, but I didn't have a full-time job at the time. I was able to go read more, go look at more, whatever wrestling stats. And again, being familiar with these schools and the coaches, or even like, for example, the ACC. I know a lot of the ACC guys, the schools, the coaches. So getting familiar with those possible storylines, because I figured, all right, well, if I know them that well, then I'm likely going to end up gravitating to covering them. So it's also about who you know and your connections. So if you make good friends with somebody, if you make nice with staffs, they're going to allow you that availability. So it's also how to network as well, and figure out, all right, who do I not know? Who do I need to meet? That's how I do that as well. Because I think a lot of people do know me as manager Rachel, and they're, I think, still getting to know me as Intermat Rachel. And it's people think I do wrestling full time, which I think is I think it's fun, because they don't realize I have a hospital job and I work in a hospital all day. That's, again, I'm talking in a really huge circle here, but I hope I'm answering your questions.
You're good. So speaking of like your clinical dietitian, how did you get into that? Like, how did you get into that?
So when I was 3, so in December of 2000, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I had grown up going to endocrinologists, or that's basically diabetes specialists, going to diabetes specialists, going to diabetes care educators, dietitians. I had this huge team of people at the hospital system I still go to, that really taught me how to live. They taught me how to count my carbohydrates, how to give myself insulin, how to use an insulin pump, how to check my blood sugar, what to do if I don't feel my best. So it was really awesome to grow up in that environment, and to have people who cared so much. And then, with wrestling, I noticed that, weight cutting was so difficult for a lot of my teammates, and that they were falling asleep during class, or they were just so tired, so fatigued. So they just looked very, the only way clinically they looked malnourished, just very pale in the face, a lot of muscle and fat wasting in their face, or in their chest and their arms. And you can tell it affects their performance. So I was like, I think it was my junior year of high school. It's like, I think I want to do this. So I thought about doing speech language pathology. I thought about going into chiropractic work, which would be fun, but also really expensive, because you have to be a doctor, like get a doctor of chiropractic. And So I settled on becoming a dietitian, and the two in-state programs in North Carolina were University of North Carolina at Greensboro and App State for nutrition programs that would like put you on track to becoming a dietitian. Well, UNCG had dropped their wrestling program when I was, I think, in the 8th or 9th grade. So that decision was made. I could not go anywhere that didn't have a wrestling program. And I was like, I guess I'm going to Appalachian. So go to Appalachian. And they had got my 4-year bachelor's degree there. There was also a 2-year Master of Science and dietetic internship combined program where I completed my internship. And it was a emphasis on rural and public health. So I got to work with some local high country hospitals. That was really awesome. And that's really prepared me, I think, for working, because I also do some private practice work. I haven't quite gotten all that set up yet. I've like started my t-shirt and sticker hustle, but I'm working on like my private practice for sports nutrition. But working in rural settings, that you have to learn how to make do with what you have, and you have to learn how to be or how you can stretch your dollar, like get the most bang for your buck, or how you can for example, you have that old pair of socks that's just been sitting on the dryer. It's like, oh, I'm not going to wear those, they have holes in them. I was like, hey, how about I use them as a dust rag? Okay, well then how about we use them as this or as that? So trying to repurpose things, or trying to use things until you can't anymore. So learning about those concepts at a smaller rural community hospitals is very helpful for the job I have now, but also helpful in working with wrestling populations, because it's like you're really working on a limited food budget almost. You want to try to eat as much as you can without gaining too much weight, without either gaining too much weight or making yourself sick, or whatever, right? So anyway, back to the original question, why I got into it. It's a mix of how I grew up and knowing that I needed to learn how to eat to live, or just bottom line survive, but also seeing my friends and seeing the people I grew up with, watching them struggle so hard with weight cutting and weight management. So it's been I love food. Food's great. Food's awesome.
So what do you do as a clinical dietitian? Like, what does that?
Well, let me get comfortable here. Okay. So as a clinical nutrition manager, I am in charge of the dietitians in the department. So there's 2 of us right now, and we handle the artificial nutrition support. So that's tube feedings, that's total parenteral nutrition. That's when you have artificial nutrition through a line that's either in your arm, that can be either in your veins here, your arm here, it could go in your chest or your neck, sometimes your leg, depending on where you need to have that line put in. I do a lot of critical care, so people who are in the intensive care units or the ICU. We also have a long-term care unit or a nursing home. And so I work with a lot of older adults and working with people who are rehabilitating broken bones, like broken hips, broken shoulders, broken arms, or maybe they, as people age, especially in smaller rural communities, they may be a little more stubborn when asking for help. Excuse me, goodness. So they're not, like they might be brought in and they've lost some weight because they weren't able to take care of themselves. They weren't able to feed themselves. They can't drive. They can't go to the grocery store. They can't cook. So, trying to help rehabilitate them, get some weight back on them, get them stronger so they can go home, and get them set up with some home health services so that they are doing better. I've also worked with people in the behavioral health setting. So people who have disordered eating or eating disorders, and how we can use food as medicine in those ways, and people who struggle with substance abuse. So again, in smaller rural communities, that's something that I've seen quite a bit of, and I've been able to help people who are trying to achieve sobriety. Um, Figure out a way to eat so that they don't fall into these patterns again. Um, so I do a lot. We also do arts and crafts sometimes. I'm also the chair for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the hospital. So planning a lot of projects right now. This is Black History Month, and I'll be planning some things for National Women's Month, trying to kind of get my feet wet a little more with that, because that committee has just been revamped. What else do I do? A lot of malnutrition assessments. So checking out our patients and making sure, if they've lost any weight recently, if they've lost any muscle or fat mass, if they have a poor appetite, if they don't like what they're eating, how can we make that better? How can we bring them something better to eat? Or even providing education. So for people who are maybe newly diagnosed with heart failure or heart conditions, newly diagnosed diabetics especially, you see that in a lot of older adults as well. So it's a big mix of things. Again, that's why I love working in a small rural setting. You get a mix of everything from critical care to the educations that you think are super, super easy, or that should be super easy, right? Or you can talk about how easy it is all day, but when you actually do educations, you're just kind of like, oh, and fumbling all over your words. And it can be kind of difficult to explain really difficult concepts at a level that people who maybe didn't finish high school or didn't get to go to college, they may not understand it. So I get to do a lot of different things, and it's a lot of fun. I don't get to work with kids too much. We usually don't have a lot of pediatrics, and if we do, they either recover pretty quickly and are out the door by the time I would see them, or they're transferred elsewhere. But usually our young people, our pediatrics it's a lot of older adults, and they're fun. I think I'm the youngest person I work with besides my colleague by about maybe 25 or 30 years. So it's very fun.
You do a lot, that's for sure.
Yes.
Very broad. But yeah, I think that's all. So thank you.
Of course.